I was pretty sure it was a UFO, the first I'd ever seen. Unfortunately, I wasn't by myself. I would have a witness to my discovery. Staring up at the night sky on an alpine camping trip a couple years ago, I spotted a long line of 15 or 20 lights rapidly moving across the night sky, like a caterpillar, sort of. I'd never seen anything like it, so I assumed it must be a UFO. We are not alone. My celestial sighting was quickly trounced by a friend. Starlink satellites, they claimed. I hadn't seen one before, but apparently my supposed UFO was part of Elon Musk's Starlink constellation, as it's referred to. This was just one of thousands of similar groupings of internet satellites orbiting the Earth. An Ethernet cable in the sky. Who knew? Since human beings first looked up with wonder, we've been both enchanted and dumbfounded by our skies, especially on a clear, dark night. Distant stars, lonely planets, the many faces of the moon, mysteries that stir our imagination. Just what is out there in the enormously large expanse we so aptly refer to as space. Here in the basin, our skies are lively. Because most of our region is uninhabited wilderness, with not many large settlements polluting the night sky with light, we can see a lot up there in the dark. Just based on my own experiences, it seems to me that lately we have more incidents of the northern lights, an increased number of meteor showers, and if you cruise the deep, dark corners of the internet, it appears we're seeing more and more UFOs. For example, British Columbia had the second highest reports of UFOs in Canada in 2023, many of those coming from the Kootenays. There's so much beauty way up there, so many discoveries still to be made, so much mystery shrouded way up high in the infinite blackness of the universe. Welcome to our episode on Our Skies. I'm Mitchell Scott, Editor-in-Chief at Kootenay Mountain Culture Productions, and this is The Headwaters, brought to you by Columbia Basin Trust. Nothing makes you feel smaller than peering up into the sky, imagining the expanse beyond. In this episode, we're sharing stories about the sky that make that big infinity feel a little closer to home. We're going to hear from people around the Kootenays who have a connection to the night sky, as well as a couple whose land was showered with rocks from outer space. So let's get our heads above the clouds and check out what Kootenay skies have to offer. Because around here, the sky is never the limit. We're going to start things off way above the atmosphere with an asteroid that hurtled its way to Earth almost 8 years ago. Amazingly, it decided to land right here in the basin's backyard, and it literally shook mountains. Writer Emily Nilsson sets off to stand in one of the fields where pieces of the meteorite landed, hoping to learn more about this precious space rock. Emily, welcome back to the Headwaters.
Hey, Mitch. It's great to be here.
So you're here to tell us about the sky actually falling.
Yeah, in a way. To be honest, I was excited to work on this story. Like so many people who live around Kootenay Lake, I vividly remember the mysterious bang and flash that happened that September Eve back in 2017. I heard it was a meteorite, but I never actually knew what, if anything, came of it.
I actually saw the meteorite from my bedroom window. This huge white flash and then giant boom. It was something I had definitely never seen before.
Yeah, and you weren't the only one. I visited Doug and Beverly Anderson at their home in Crawford Bay. They own a property where a handful of meteorites from that event were found by a research team. My son Remy was with me, and like a lot of 4-year-olds, he's really into outer space. Do you know where we're going?
No.
Are we going to someone's house?
Yeah.
Are we going somewhere where something landed?
Yeah.
What?
A meteorite.
What is that?
Meteorite from space.
Did it come from space?
Yeah. What is a meteorite?
It's a chunk of rock that comes from...
outer space?
Yeah. And then it landed near here. Pretty cool, hey? Doug and Beverly live on a 20-acre property several kilometers up a quiet forested road just northeast of Crawford Bay. When I called to ask if we could come check out where the meteorite landed, they were surprised, seeing as how long ago it was, but welcoming. Hello.
Hi there.
Hi.
Hi.
I'm Emily.
Hello, Emily.
Nice to
I'm
meet
Beverly.
you.
Hi.
And then this is Remy.
Hi, Rennie.
They invited us into their house, and the first thing I asked them was what it felt like to have a meteorite land just over a stone's throw away from their house. Here's Doug.
It was just a brilliant flash, and it lasted for a fair period of time. You know, we were downstairs watching TV, and we came running up here, and the whole sky it's like daylight. And then kerboom, that sonic boom, and it just rattled the house. It literally rattled the house. And you could hear it bouncing off the mountains. It echoed all the way down the lake, you know. We didn't think much more of it, you know. It was a very unusual happening, you know.
Definitely unusual. Did the Andersons know what had happened?
Not right away. Like most of us, they'd put it out of their minds. And then a month and a half later, they found out a fireball from space had narrowly missed their house.
And then it was a Sunday night. We were watching TV, and we get a knock at the door. And this guy comes in and introduces himself, and he's got a University of Calgary pickup. So I thought, so it was legit,
Yeah.
you know. And so he asked us if he could bring his equipment in, and that's what he did. They had a tractor with a massive group of magnets. It was about 6 feet, or maybe even 12 feet wide, and they dragged that behind the tractor. And on this field down here, they found it down here.
Oh, okay, yeah.
It was down at the bottom there they found it.
The guy knocking at Doug Anderson's door was Alan Hildebrand, a planetary scientist from the University of Calgary. He was the investigation lead, and his team were there to comb the fields by the Andersons' house, looking for meteorites.
Very cool. How did they know where to look?
It was a real group effort. First, because it was a clear sky, they were able to work out the meteorite's trajectory as it entered the atmosphere using eyewitness accounts and footage from cameras recording parts of the sky, like security cameras and cameras set up specifically to record meteorites. For example, the College of the Rockies in Cranbrook has a dedicated Fireball all-sky camera that recorded the fireball from start to finish.
Wow. Okay. So they've got the footage. Now what do they do with it?
A lot of calibrations and then calculations of something called dark flight. This is when the rock is no longer glowing but still in flight. I'm going to let Alan Hildebrand explain.
So for the Crawford Bay fireball, a colleague, Dr. Elizabeth Silver, did the calculations of this dark flight, not just for the rocks that made it to the end of the trajectory, but there were several big explosions, big light bursts along the trajectory. The trajectory was pretty flat, so it traveled a long ways up Kootenay Lake over Crawford Bay. And each of those bursts also releases a lot of rocks, and the small rocks slow down quickly too. So those rocks are falling from higher than the 20 kilometers for the end, maybe 35 kilometers even.
I want to pause here for a moment to picture this early September evening in the Kootenays when the asteroid fragment entered the atmosphere with the brilliance of, and these are Alan's words, a 1 billion-watt bulb. The team retracing the meteorite's journey was made up of researchers from Canada, Finland, Italy, the US, all collaborating to find out where it landed. Here's Alan describing the next steps.
So you plot the predictions on Google Earth, and we could see the finer grained rocks that weren't, just in the forest there, which is pretty tough country, but the zone of predicted fall for the small rocks across the east side of Crawford Bay. And out towards the waste site, there's a series of small farms and orchards that come into that zone. And you can imagine it's a lot easier to be looking for little dark rocks in a field or an orchard than it is in the forest.
So they've homed in on a small area, relatively speaking, to where the meteorite came from. But it's still a pretty big chunk of land to find some rocks, even if they are big rocks. How small are the pieces they're looking for?
When the fireball first came into the atmosphere, they figured it was somewhere between 1 to 5 tons. But remember, as it came closer to Earth, there were several big explosions which broke it into smaller and smaller rocks. Some the size of a peppercorn, others weighing up to 10 kilos. Alan says even though thousands of meteorites would have fallen, most of them would be hidden by the forest.
Except for the Andersons' land.
Except for the Andersons' land and a few other properties, which they've only seen on a map. Here's Alan describing what happens next.
So we've checked and we see an area that we think would be a good place to look for meteorites. And then we have one more piece in the toolkit. We have a big magnetic rake.
The big magnetic rake is like a tractor with a plow full of magnets. Because many types of meteorites have metal in them, like iron or nickel grains, they're attracted to the magnet.
I phoned the Andersons, and Doug Anderson often remarked to me it was a strange phone call to have someone phone up to tell him we thought meteorites had fallen on his land. But happily, after I explained what we were doing and what we'd like to do, he said that we could come out and search this small field of brush that was adjacent to his house.
Alan and his graduate student, Fabio Ciceri, went out and toiled their magnet tractor around in the brush field by the Andersons, and within an hour, they'd found their first meteorite.
Their first of how many did they find?
Well, altogether, using the magnetic rake, they found 10.
How about other people in the area? Anyone else finding any meteorites?
To be honest, I'm not exactly sure how many have been found since. I know pieces were found on other properties and by other people, but as for the total count outside of the research team, I'm not sure. Of course, my son Remy and I were inspired to head down into the field to see if we could find anything. Where should we go? Where are we going right now, Rem?
Over where that pile is.
What do you think happened down there?
Meteorite fell. Yeah. Mommy, do you think it landed?
Look there's all sorts of rocks down here.
Rocks from the meteorite? Do you know meteorites come from fool's gold?
Fact check. Meteorites do not come from fool's gold.
Oh, poor Remy got it wrong?
Yeah. In fact, the Crawford Bay meteorite is a type of rock called a chondrite, which is a very old rock. The ordinary chondrites are 4.5 billion years old, so as old or slightly older than our planet. Alan says that by studying meteorites, we're better able to understand the origins of our solar system.
They are pieces of asteroids, so they tell us about the asteroids. The asteroids, of course, are the bits of rock left over in the solar system that didn't end up getting swept up into a planet.
Alan explained that the terrestrial planets, so Mars, Earth, Venus, and Jupiter, all formed from asteroids that coalesced. There's a gap between Mars and Jupiter where that didn't happen, and so that's where we have the asteroid belt. And within that belt, there are asteroid families. These are clumps of asteroids that move in similar orbits. It's possible that the Crawford Bay meteorite came from one of these families. But the bigger the piece of meteorite you have to study, the more information you can glean.
If you have a big piece, naturally that's big enough, you can do various tests that'll tell you about the rocks on the surface of an asteroid. That's relevant these days a bit in the sense our civilization is getting to the point where if we found an asteroid that was coming our way and going to impact the planet, that we may have the capability to go into space and alter its orbit so it will miss us.
For most of my life, I've avoided thinking about space. Its vastness makes me weirdly claustrophobic. But as I scour the rocky field just below the Andersons' house, I'm acutely aware of how vulnerable we all are, innocently spinning around in a universe of flying space rocks. As my partner and I argue over the difference between a meteor and an asteroid, the little space junkie among us makes a discovery.
I found a meteorite. Found a meteorite sticking out of the ground.
Pardon?
I can see a meteorite stuck in the ground. Mommy, look.
Let's see. You think it got lodged in there?
Yeah, when it landed.
The rock Remy found is like a silver flying saucer sticking half out of the ground. It's a cool rock, though definitely not a meteorite. But in that moment, it doesn't really matter. What matters is that we're learning about worlds bigger than our own and believing, for just a second, that we've touched another side of the sky.
Freshwater, forest wilderness, alpine glaciers. When we think of natural abundance in the Kootenays, it usually has little to do with the sky. But in a world of dwindling darkness, the night sky that still covers parts of the basin not only helps feed our imagination, but our wildlife too. Emily Nilsson is here to keep us in the dark.
When I was a kid, I used to throw pine cones up into the dark sky, watching bats swoop in. That unlit spot I used to stand in is now flooded by streetlight, and there really aren't any bats there anymore. It kind of just feels eerily sterile, like that pocket of the world got a little too bright too fast. But darkness still exists, and here in the basin, we still have lots of it. I spoke to someone in Edgewater, a little town in the Columbia Valley, who's hoping to keep it that way.
My name is Tim McIntosh, and I'm the director of the Kootenay Stardome Foundation. And so our mission is to create a dark sky reserve in East Kootenay.
A dark sky reserve is a designated area that protects the quality of the night sky, usually by minimizing light pollution. The proposed Kootenay Stardome Reserve would be a 4,200 square kilometer zone between Fairmont and Parson that stretches into Kootenay Park as well as into the Bugaboos. The goal would be to reduce existing light pollution in that area and also minimize potential light pollution that may arrive in the future.
Our area here has faced a lot of development pressure over the last number of decades. And so we are definitely looking at ways to reach forward through planning mechanisms and so on to reduce the development pressure. So we are starting from very good quality dark skies, which can be a real advantage for tourism, for ecotourism type activities, which our area really relies on. But I think like one of the main things that we're trying to do is really connect people with darkness so that they can care about it on a really personal level and make sure that they're making choices, not necessarily just trying to do the right thing, but doing something that they really want to do as well, right?
Tim highlighted that this proposal to create a dark sky reserve is not unique to the Kootenay region. They're following in the footsteps of an organization known as Dark Sky International, which has 250 sites worldwide, 150 of which are in North America. Tim says that by keeping things dark where possible and adjusting the amount and quality of light in areas that need to be lit, there are real benefits for climate, energy, human health, aesthetics, as well as wildlife and ecology.
The wildlife piece is pretty interesting. A lot of it has to do with sort of circadian rhythms and the way that migrations happen the way that hunting and foraging happens in the night. You know, when we shine a light and all the moths sort of flock there, it's going to change the hunting habits of the predators who are using those, as well as the fact that those moths are pollinators. And so when they're messing around with lights, they're not doing their work as pollinators.
That's the rarely heard sound of long-eared Myotis bats feeding at night. Curious about the role that darkness plays for bats, I connected with a local bat biologist.
I'm Corey Lawson. I'm the Director of Bat Conservation with Wildlife Conservation Society Canada, and our BC office is in the little town of Caslow.
Corey explained that bats are the only flying mammal we have. At one point, they would have been hiding on the ground from predators, but they evolved in the dark to eat flying insects, which allowed their evolution of flight. As their wings evolved, the skin between their arm and leg got very thin, and this thin skin wouldn't have held up in sunlight because it could get very easily damaged. But it's not just sunlight that affects bats. It's also artificial lighting.
Artificial lighting is certainly a threat to bats in that it reduces their foraging opportunities for most species because they are going to avoid those areas. I've seen that myself doing field work, all over British Columbia, where I'm trying to capture bats in areas where there's a lot of light. I either catch no bats or I catch a very skewed sample of just some of the species in those areas. So, and there's also a lot of research just in general around the world showing that bats are avoiding these lit areas.
To complicate things, some species are okay with lights because, depending on the type of light, it can attract insects, and some bat species are able to feast on this congregation of bugs. But that's not the case for most bats, and increasingly it's not the case because different types of lights, like LED, have less of a bug-attracting quality, and because bats are considered philopatric, meaning they go back to the place they were born, they're really sensitive to these kind of lighting disturbances.
If the lighting has come in at a time where they keep using these places year after year and they're not going to move, they're not just going to say, well, this place is lit up, so we're gonna move over to the next drainage or something and use that area. They, for whatever reason, they don't do that, and it's probably because they're such long-lived mammals. You know, they live for decades, and they are literally creatures of habit.
Talking to both Corey, the bat biologist, and Tim, the dark sky advocate, really illuminated the importance of considering all angles when making decisions about how we exist alongside the natural world, of which darkness is an important part. We're constantly having to navigate trade-offs like, we want clean energy, so we build wind farms, but the red lights on the wind farms may attract migrating bats who can't echolocate off of moving turbines. That's just one example of a lighting challenge researchers are trying to solve.
The lighting is there for humans and human safety, and how do we balance that with wildlife like bats in particular? And I think that's increasingly difficult because we don't necessarily understand well enough how bats react to some of our lights too, and can we change them in ways that still allow for safety, but not impact them or at least as many species.
So darkness is key to the survival of certain wildlife, but in a more abstract way, it's also important for the human imagination. And this could not be truer for Jim Holyoke, a Nelson-based artist who recently did a solo exhibition at the Langham Gallery in Caslow called Moth House. It was inspired by a nocturnal pollinator garden that grew beside his studio. Jim says he's enjoyed walking at night, even as a kid, but after high school, the practice really took hold.
I found that I could become nocturnal if I wanted to, because I didn't have to get up early to go to school. And so I became more and more nocturnal. I would stay up later and later and later, about an hour later every night. And then I would go for walks with my dog named Sue. She was a wonderful border collie, black and white dog. And we would go for walks at 4 or 5 in the morning through town and all over the place. And it'd be completely quiet. I would see nobody. It'd be so still and so peaceful. But then there was the forest. and I would look at the opening to the forest like a darkening door.
Much of Jim's work is done around themes of animals, monsters, and imaginary worlds, and one might say that that darkening door Jim encountered during his night walks holds the same feeling one might get standing in front of his artwork now.
And I would walk into the forest with Sue, and I could see occasionally a star through the trees, but I could keep my eye on the white spot on Sue's back. She would kind of know the way by smell, and I would follow her through the field, or through the forest. And I really fell in love with being in the forest alone. So that's been a habit or a hobby that I never quite got over. I am a night owl. I don't work very well in the morning. I can do it, but it's not my best time to function. It seems to be after sundown that I would feel my mind clear up, and I'd be able to focus on things in a much more immersive way, a much better concentration as soon as it's nighttime.
For Jim, getting into the dark was, in a sense, a way of getting out of the dark, a way to spend time with both the real and imaginary creatures that show up in his artwork. That dark pine woods from my childhood may be long gone, but the feeling it once stirred still exists. And even better, we can actually do something about preserving the dark because it'll not only help the animals, but the artists too.
Now it's time for...
It's a tiny town.
Welcome to Tiny Town, where we stop by those places we usually pass by. About an hour's drive north of Castlegar on Highway 6, as you follow the crystal blue meandering waters of the Slocan River, you'll find yourself in the village of Slocan, located on the southern shores of Slocan Lake. Surrounded by the high peaks of the Valhalla Mountains to the west and the Selkirks to the east, Slocan City, as it's often called, is a beautiful, peaceful community of about 380 people, give or take a couple. But it wasn't always that way. During the 1890s, it was a boisterous boomtown with hotels, saloons, and rail cars filled with miners looking for the Galena motherlode. Today, the only rowdy thing left is up in the night sky, where very little light pollution allows for incredible stargazing. It's also, as we'll find out, ideal for night photography.
Yeah, I love photographing the Columbia Basin and the area surrounding, the mountains, waters, kind of everything. I spend a lot of time photographing the night sky especially. That's kind of what I started doing for photos. Like, that was my main entryway into landscape photography, was a big interest in the night sky.
That's Ashley Voykin, an extremely talented and hardworking outdoor adventure and landscape photographer who was born and raised in Castlegar and now lives in nearby Rossland.
You know, it started out with photographing just from my backyard of like the Milky Way, trying to experiment with that a little bit. And before long, you kind of realize that there's a lot of spots in the basin where it's like blocked by mountains, or you just can't quite see it. We have a lot of trees where you're trying to shoot around. So trying to find like super expansive views is sometimes a bit of a challenge. If there's like a good Northern Lights forecast and it looks like there's going to be a show, I drive right to Slocan City. That's usually my go-to. It's just the way that the valley, like the topography of the valley, really lends itself well to it, because it goes with a view towards the north. You have the Valhallas on one side, on your left, going into the lake, and you can just look straight ahead. And if you're photographing Northern Lights, like, you have the reflection, you have the stars above. It's just really the perfect spot for it.
Ah, the benefits of a tiny, dimly lit town.
There are a few, like, couple little street lights there, but it's really not anything overpowering, where you can still see the stars right from in town, which is pretty hard to come by for a lot of areas.
And that's our podcast on our skies. To find out more about the people and places in this episode, make sure to visit headwaterspodcast.com. The Headwaters is brought to you by Columbia Basin Trust. To find out more about all the good things the Trust does when it comes to supporting people and communities in the basin, go to ourtrust.org. The Headwaters is produced by the good folks at Kootenay Mountain Culture Productions. A big thanks to our reporter for this episode, Emily Nilsson, and her emerging astronomer, Remy. Derek Cunningham is our story editor and producer. Graham Tracy is our sound engineer. Vince Hempsall, our digital content manager. Stacy Machowski makes all of our custom art, and Jesse Lee our music. I'm Mitchell Scott. Thanks for listening.